It was late on a Friday evening when Donald Trump took to his favorite stage, the internet. His post was sharp, smug, and dripping with the kind of confidence only Trump could muster. I absolutely love that Colbert got fired. His talent was even less than his ratings. He typed it out as if those words were going to echo through history. A permanent victory lap in his never-ending war with critics. But the irony is impossible to ignore. If Colbert truly had no talent, if he was just a forgotten late-night host with sagging ratings, why did Trump, a former president of the United States, spend his precious time thinking about him? Why did he bother to rage in the middle of the night about a man who tells jokes for a living? And most importantly, why did the so-called victor sound so much like the loser who couldn't let go of a feud? This was not just a petty remark on social media. It was the start of yet another bizarre chapter in the saga between a reality TV president and a comedian who turned politics into performance art. And before long, it would become obvious that Trump had picked a fight he wasn't equipped to win. Welcome back to Scandal Pulse. Before we dive deep into this chaotic war of words, this is the perfect time to remind you if you enjoy watching powerful people get exposed. If you want to follow the unraveling stories behind politics, media, and public spectacle, then make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Support our channel because every subscription helps us bring you the truth behind the headlines in a way the mainstream rarely does. And trust me, by the time you're done with this story, you'll see why no feud is quite as entertaining or as revealing as Donald Trump versus Stephen Colbert. It began the way most of Trump's conflicts began, with a tweet written in frustration and fired off without hesitation. Somewhere in the dimly lit rooms of Mar-a-Lago, perhaps in a bathrobe, Trump sat behind his phone scrolling, seething, and plotting comeback. He believed he had landed a final blow, dismissing Colbert as untalented. But in comedy, timing is everything. And Colbert's timing, as the world was about to witness, was merciless. The late-night host, famous for his sly, smirk, and sharp tongue, took Trump's attempt at mockery and transformed it into an open invitation to unleash a storm of comedy so brutal it left the former president looking like a man who had stepped into the wrong fight. Because Trump had brought a crane to a Shakespeare duel, Colbert didn't just respond. He went full savage, constructing a 10-minute barrage of scorched earth humor that struck harder than any political critique. Each line was polished, precise, and devastating. The crowd roared with laughter while Trump somewhere out there realized too late that this wasn't just about ratings or talent. It was about survival in the world of words. The magic of these moments lies not only in the jokes, but in the paradox they expose. Here was a man who claimed to be a billionaire, the most powerful figure on earth, reduced to a punchline by a comedian whose job is to keep insomniac Americans company past midnight. Trump, the self-styled king of dominance, was being crushed under the weight of sarcasm and ridicule. Nothing could be more poetic than watching Colbert, a man in a well-tailored suit and armed only with a microphone, dismantle Trump's fragile ego. For Trump, this was never supposed to happen. He wanted a war of words where his volume and rage would carry him through. But against Colbert's wit, his spray-tanned armor melted like wax under a spotlight. And then came the timing of world events. Just as Trump was throwing digital tantrums at comedians, he made an announcement to the world. The U.S. had launched strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Was it strategy? Was it reckless impulse? Nobody seemed to know for sure. What the public did know was that the decision felt less like a commander-in-chief at work, and more like an Uber driver slamming on the brakes in the middle of a road rage episode with all of us trapped in the back seat. And yet, despite these grave events unfolding, Trump still found the time to pick fights with Colbert, as if a late-night comedian had somehow become the most dangerous opponent to his presidency. Colbert, never one to miss an opportunity, latched onto this hypocrisy like a shark catching the scent of blood. With that trademark, Gwinnett said, "I read books and I know what verbs are." Colbert struck back. He painted Trump not as a strongman, but as a parody of an overinflated character who stumbled through world affairs while obsessing over television jokes. And the audience laughed not just because Colbert was funny, but because he was saying what everyone else was thinking. Trump's ego was so fragile, so dependent on applause that even late-night monologues could shatter his composure. But Trump kept coming. He lashed out about ratings, lawsuits, and unfair treatment. He raged about fake news, waved his fists at comedy sketches, and demanded the world take him seriously while simultaneously proving why nobody could. Colbert didn't have to exaggerate. He simply held up a mirror, and in that mirror, the world saw a president unraveling, furious at a comedian who had outplayed him in the arena of satire. The irony was overwhelming. Trump had once thrived on ridicule, on mocking opponents with nicknames and insults. But when the ridicule turned back on him, when he became the target of relentless humor, he couldn't cope. Colbert weaponized laughter in a way Trump never anticipated. And the more Trump protested, the more powerful Colbert's comedy became. The beauty of satire is that it requires awareness. To laugh at yourself is to acknowledge your flaws, to accept the absurdity of the human condition. But Trump has never been able to do that. For him, every joke is an attack, every critique a betrayal. He could never grasp that Colbert wasn't just mocking him. He was dissecting him piece by piece, revealing the absurdities that Trump tried so desperately to cover with bluster. Whether it was Trump's obsession with crowd sizes, his bizarre comments about raking forests to prevent wildfires, or his impulsive suggestion of buying Greenland as if it were a luxury golf course, Colbert had a catalog of material so rich it could last for decades. And Trump kept feeding him. Every tweet, every press conference, every tantrum was another gift wrapped in gold foil for Colbert to open before millions of viewers. And the viewers loved it. Ratings climbed each time Trump ranted about nasty late-night hosts. It was a self-defeating cycle. Trump attacked Colbert. Colbert roasted Trump, and audiences tuned in to watch the carnage. Colbert became sharper, funnier, more ruthless, while Trump became angrier, more incoherent, more desperate to silence a laughter that echoed louder than his rallies. Trump wanted control. Colbert wanted comedy. And in the battlefield of public opinion, comedy almost always wins. But perhaps the most devastating part of this saga is not the jokes themselves, but the symbolism behind them. Trump, who once stood as the most powerful man in the world, was reduced to shadow. Boxing with a comedian, his rebuttals, often delivered in all-caps rants, awkwardly phrased press releases, read less like statements of strength and more like the ramblings of a man who didn't understand he had already lost. Colbert's comebacks, on the other hand, were polished symphonies of satire, razor-sharp, devastating, and unforgettable. It was as if Trump was playing checkers while Colbert played four-dimensional chess with sarcasm as his queen. And the more Trump raged, the more Colbert thrived. It became clear to everyone watching that this was not a fair fight. It was not even a fight at all. It was a massacre of dignity, of logic, of self-control. Trump, with his thin skin and endless hunger for validation, could never withstand the relentless force of comedy. Every night, Colbert turned his blunders into punchlines, his lies into setups, his rants into applause breaks, and Trump, whether he admitted it or not, was giving Cole exactly what he needed: content. Trump wanted silence. Colbert gave him a spotlight. Trump wanted obedience. Colbert gave him mockery. Trump wanted respect. Colbert gave him laughter. And that more than anything was unbearable for a man who built his identity on dominance. Because at the end of the day, no amount of lawsuits, no volume of tweets, and no number of press conferences could erase the truth. In the war between Trump and Colbert, the comedian had already won, not by screaming, not by threatening, but by laughing. And laughter, as Trump has learned again and again, is the one weapon he cannot control, cannot silence, and cannot defeat. Trump's obsession with Colbert only deepened over time. And with each passing week, it became clearer that this feud wasn't just a clash between a politician and a comedian, but a living, breathing example of how fragile power can look when stripped of its illusions. Because every time Trump opened his mouth or pounded on his keyboard, he exposed more of the insecurities he tried so hard to mask behind bravado, and Colbert, with his arsenal of wit, sarcasm, and unshakable poise, transformed. Thus, he outburst into comedy that felt less like jokes and more like truths wrapped in laughter, cutting sharper than any editorial or political speech ever could. And as Trump hurled claims of fake news, complained about ratings, and repeated the same tired lines about witch hunts, Colbert simply leaned into the absurdity, amplifying the contradictions and letting the public see the emperor with no clothes, sprayed and dripping under the spotlight, hair swirling in the wind, clutching desperately at a narrative that was crumbling around him. And what made it even more devastating was the fact that Trump, for all his bluster about strength and winning, was losing in the most humiliating way possible, losing not to a political rival, not to a general, not to a journalist, but to a man who stood on stage in a tailored suit and told bedtime jokes to millions of insomniacs. Because that man had mastered the art of laughter. And in laughter, Trump found an enemy he could never outshout. Never, intimidate, never sue into silence. An enemy who turned his tantrums into punchlines and his failures into applause breaks, leading Trump trapped in an endless loop of rage and ridicule. A tragic comic figure doomed to repeat his mistakes while Colbert thrived, reminding America night after night that sometimes the sharpest weapon against arrogance and delusion is not anger, not fear, but humor. And that is why no matter how many tweets Trump fired, no matter how many lawsuits he filed, no matter how many times he claimed victory, he could never escape the truth Stephen Colbert had already won. And the laughter of millions was the proof.